Hello, this online lecture will run you through Assessment 4 materiality in terms of the presentation format and also some student work samples. This is a new format that you'll be working with for this assessment task. So what we're asking you to do is to move from using A3 pages into an A2 page. This is really a means of getting you to practice composition. So composition of various elements on a page, be they textual or graphic. The orientation of the page is completely up to you. So you can use a landscape page or you can use a portrait page. Think about which is best going to fit the images that you've got and the text that you'll be communicating. Consider the composition of the page. So how are you telling the story of one image to another, to a bank of text, to another image? How are you narrating the material expression of your space? Remember that you don't have to fill up every inch of the page. It actually can be quite effective to work out a hierarchy of white space versus used space. The white space can really place emphasis on the elements that are filling the space of the page. So think about how you want to tell the story of the scheme and where you want to direct the viewer's attention to. So what elements are really important? Are they going to be stronger? Are they going to be bigger? Are they going to be in the center or the bottom or the top of the page? What elements are less important? So they might be smaller. They might be less strong in terms of the graphic. They might be in another area of the page. This kind of hierarchical discussion refers to the visual weight of an element. So if you want us to read all of your elements with equal importance, have a look at the image on the left. So all of these are equally balanced in terms of their size. They're all equally balanced in terms of white and black space, and the rhythm and patterns of the images are equal. The image on the right has an uneven weighting or an uneven hierarchy. So our eye is really drawn to the center of the page where we've got this photographic image. It's quite big, it's clear, and then we've got these three-dimensional models that float on top of that. Secondary to these elements are the components at the bottom and the top of this page, which might start to tell the story of the process or the research or some of the background elements. So think about how you tell the story of your scheme. What is really important? What is less important? What is background information? And how do you use your graphic skills to communicate those elements in that hierarchy? Really practical tip, use a grid. Okay, so you can think about overlaying your page in InDesign with a grid so that you can start to align elements both vertically and horizontally. This creates a really consistent visual rhythm across your page, and it can be a means of directing our attention to the image rather than to inconsistencies in terms of images misaligning or text misaligning, which can be kind of distracting to the eye. So now some student work samples from last year. So this was Patricia Hu from last year. Patricia really clearly described a very simple space. So she has the grocer on one side, the apartment on the other, and a very seamless boundary between the two, connected by an upper courtyard. This simple space she really started to kind of layer with materiality, and again very pared back materiality. But she understood that there was a kind of warm grey slate tile on the floor, timber in different shades, a warm light overlaid with natural light, and a series of pendant lights as well as spotlights that started to scatter throughout the space. She then had a very fine white scheme and white background wall that started to hug the space and highlight some of the timber and warm finishes. So again, simple space, simple material palette, but very rigorously understood. So it wasn't just this is timber. It was this is this type of timber. This is another type of timber laid in a different format. This bench top is cork. This is concrete, but it has a warm wash through it. This is a spotlight, this is a pendant light. This comes from the ceiling, this comes from the floor. Okay, so we're really asking for a detailed understanding like Patricia has demonstrated. Grace had a more formally complex scheme and again quite pared back materials with these punches of blue that started to highlight her joinery elements. So similar to Patricia, we start to see how those materials are expressed by relating the material palette on the right to the images on the left. You can see on the right a series of white tiles, and then I go to the bathroom and go, okay, that's where those bathroom tiles play out. We can see the copper, scratched copper on the right, and then I see there's a whole wall and roof of copper that lines the interior, the vertical elements of the space. We then start to see how light plays out. So you can see that there's this warm, sort of diffuse light with quite specific lighting elements that Grace has both sourced and designed. So this is the kind of detail that we'd like to see in your scheme. Alana did really well in terms of understanding how her palette would relate to the existing material palette of the site. So you can see on the left a very clear existing palette and something that really contrasts that palette. So we have quite warm, worn grey, greys and browns of the timber and the render and the brick. And then the pops of green in the existing site. And then Alana has done something very different and introduced smooth marbles and pops of pink and timber. I don't know whether marble is the most appropriate for two clients who don't have a lot of money, but she has really fleshed out and understood the intricacies of her material palette and been very intentional in contrasting her palette to the existing palette of the site. So this is the reason for getting you to understand the palette of the existing site, the user, and your proposal. We'd like to see how those three palettes relate to one another and then how they play out very clearly in your drawings. So in all of these examples, you can see that the palette relates very explicitly to the section and the plan perspective on the A2 page. Isabella had, again, quite a dramatic formal proposal of this big yellow form that cut through the space. In week 8, she had this as a timber element, and what she decided to do was really express it by painting the whole thing yellow. So that I thought was a good indication of how you might take your form and use materiality to strengthen it and to take it in a completely different direction. Isabella understood that the grosser and the kind of background elements of her scheme would have a much more quiet material expression. So she reused the existing brickwork from the site, and that her insertion in terms of the apartment would be much louder and punchier in response to the users and I guess their aesthetic, which you start to see in their artwork and some of the choices of the furnishings in their house.